So, on behalf of the Policy Center for the New South, I would like to extend a very warm thank you to you, Rama, and to the colleagues at the Africa Center and at the Atlantic Council for the usual support and for the very fruitful collaboration between our two institutions. So this webinar is actually marking the launch and the kickoff of a series of webinars jointly organized by the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat and the Atlantic Council, a series that will tackle diverse topics, but always with the Atlantic at the core and the heart of the topics that we will talk about. And this is the first webinar, and it will be followed by two other webinars and reports that will be published on the same topics by researchers from the institutions. So we consider this series of webinars to be a platform that is open for us, but also for others, for sparking knowledge and dialogue. And this is where us think tanks play a major role by being a support and being a reinforcement to the momentum that is around the Atlantic. So the Atlantic is an area that holds today even more a very strategic importance, especially with the current context that is going in around the world, and where the balance of powers are being redefined, and where Africa should be able to face different and new types of challenges, but also be able to seize new opportunities that can arise from this very specific context. The Atlantic holds a very strategic and key importance for our country, Morocco. It was reinforced by the vision of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI with his international initiative for the Atlantic Africa, but also to promote the Sahel countries' access to the Atlantic Ocean. Here at the Policy Center for the New South, the Atlantic has always been at the heart of our reflection, but also our reason of being. And this is embedded with our flagship conference, the Atlantic Dialogues, for which we are organizing the 15th edition this year, and where we have speakers from all over the region of the Atlantic that come here and share their ideas and their perspectives on very timely and key topics, going from security to energy transition. We also have a report, The Atlantic Currents, where we have authorship from different people from the Atlantic contributing with their ideas. From an Atlantic region perspective, energy transition and climate change are a key challenge and a key topic, but this is something that is shared with different regions from the world. In a context that is marked today with a lot of uncertainty around the support that we have for climate finance and energy transition, the role of critical minerals remains something that is very looked for and very shared with different countries. And it is at the heart of interest of very strong powers in the world that are aiming to secure sufficient supply in these critical minerals for different reasons. From an African point of view, the wealth in critical minerals in this continent is not always translated into the creation of additional economic value. And this is due to different reasons that we will tackle again more in detail in the webinar. So at the PCNS, we have looked into different reasons why this is happening. And the reason we see that is that there is a different context in different countries. So when we look at a country like Indonesia, even though we have a lot of concentration in the processing of critical minerals, they have looked into strategies such as downstreaming in order to allow the country to benefit from the transformation of their critical minerals on the ground. Our focus in our research has been on the DRC and how even though the country's GDP, 40% of it is correlated to copper and cobalt, the country does even suffer from the fluctuation of the prices of cobalt on international markets. The reason being is that the transformation and processing of cobalt is dominated still by China in the country. We have looked into how a country that is holding 70% of the world's cobalt resources can benefit from this strategic mineral. And we have seen how initiatives that are ongoing in a country, such as the creation of Buenasa in Lualaba, a local refining company, can create a window of opportunities for such African countries. But this remains very strongly linked and tied to elements such as a fruitful collaboration between countries, such thing that can be done through initiatives such as EFCTFA, and also investing in suitable energy infrastructure that can allow these initiatives to see the day. Investing in human capital training is also key for critical minerals, and this is something that can be done in collaboration between African countries. So I think this research can be found on our website if you'd like to find out more, but I think something that we can all agree on is that Even though not all countries share the same priority for energy transition in the context that we have today, the role of critical minerals remains very central for several countries, and their concentration in very specific regions creates an even added pressure on being the one that secures the most supply of critical minerals. I will hand the virtual mic now to you, Bill, to hear more about this topic, and thank you all for being here with us today.
That was a delightful introduction. And Rama, thank you for your remarks. A core focus for this particular panel is sustainable energy and minerals, the Atlantic case, and these are a lot of things: oil and gas, offshore wind, critical minerals, like Sabrina said, and also some less developed things like waves and currents, ocean thermal energy conversion, floating voltaics, and sand. Little thought of sand, but a lot of people mine it. And then the impacts that development can have on climate and biodiversity and fisheries. And then, of course, we need to remember that the Atlantic Ocean is not an ocean entire of itself. It sits in a framework of connections to land and people, including challenges to civil society in West Africa and Africa that threaten sustainable resource use. So our panelists are a very distinguished group, and time only allows for the briefest of summaries about them in alphabetical order. And forgive me, I could say much more about each of you. So Elizabeth Ide is Executive Director for the Division on Earth and Life Studies. Its acronym is DELS, at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And to note on the academies, and I could go on at some length, I've worked with them for a long time, and they're such an important organization for independent, authoritative science in the United States. But the academies, it was first chartered by Abraham Lincoln. I think everyone has heard of him. But it operates as a nonprofit. It doesn't have continuing funding from the US government. It's through projects. And Elizabeth's division produces in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 of its sort of gold standard, fully reviewed reports, mostly to federal agencies, 30 to 40 a year. So that's a report roughly every 10 days. So back to Elizabeth now. Before joining the academy, Elizabeth served in the Geological Survey of Norway, and she is an elected member of the Royal Norwegian Society of Sciences and Letters. And she has a doctorate in geology from Stanford University and a bachelor's in geology from Franklin and Marshall College. So Dan Hamilton is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, SAISIS, as people know it, and the Foreign Policy Institute there, and the African, and he's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. At SAIS, he leads a project exploring the new dynamics of the Atlantic Basin. So what he's working on is really central to everything Sabrina was talking about. That's his focus. And Dan, you really have had too many posts to list. But I would call what you've been doing since the State Department career just a whole range of really interesting academic posts and efforts. And then before that, Dan had an entire career at the State Department, including serving as Deputy Assistant Secretary for European Affairs. So a lot of connections. And he has a PhD and master's degree from Johns Hopkins, and he has a list of honors and awards as well. Kelly Kirk is now a senior fellow at the Wilson Center. She's working on polar and ocean issues. Until very recently, probably January, but I didn't check on the date. She was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Fisheries of the Department of Commerce. And that's a huge job. I'm pretty familiar with it. It's responsible for representing US interests in multilateral and bilateral fishery negotiations in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. And she's had previous positions with the Senate, the State Department, OSTP in the White House, and the Interior Department, and in the nonprofit sector with the New England Aquarium, the Center for American Progress, and the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Kelly has a PhD in earth science from Boston University, an MS in oceanography from the Graduate School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island, and a BA in geology and marine science from Middlebury College in Vermont. Dr. Bakare Sambe is regional director of the Timbuktu Institute Africa Center for Peace Studies and founder of the Observatory of Radicalism and Religious Conflicts in Africa. His current work focuses on indigenous strategies, cross-border dynamics, and the testing of agile approaches in climate and crisis zones. Dr. Sambe has a long distinguished experience too, in many things really to go through, Bakare, so forgive me for being brief. But for his work and expertise, he was elected a member of the Council of the International Institute for Justice and the Rule of Law, based in Malta. And Bakare has a PhD in political science, international relations from the Université Lumière Lyon 2, and also bachelor and master's degrees. So with that, I'd like to ask Dan if he would start his presentation.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks to the Atlantic Council and to the Policy Center. I've been many times at the Atlantic Dialogues and was on the advisory board for the Atlantic Dialogues and interact with the colleagues in Morocco a lot. And I should say, if you're interested in the Atlantic Basin, we have an extensive series of papers and reports. If you go to transatlantic.org, you'll see all sorts of analyses on the Atlantic. I'm glad we're getting this opportunity because often the Atlantic, doesn't get any respect. Geostrategically, people talk about the Pacific. It's all about the Pacific. Scientists usually talk about the world ocean. And we divide our world politically into the Eastern or Western hemisphere or the Northern or Southern hemisphere. There's talk of an Asian hemisphere. Well, by definition, if there's an Asian hemisphere, then there is an Atlantic hemisphere. So, my scene setter here briefly is to set the stage of why we use the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic Basin, as even a unit of analysis, because that's rare. Even when we say transatlantic, we actually mean North Atlantic usually. So my term is pan-Atlantic when I talk about how the four continents of the Atlantic are interacting. And I think those dynamics, while escaping a lot of attention, are actually really quite interesting and distinctive, and especially on this topic. So if you think about what's distinctive about the Atlantic related to the issues we talk about today, first of all, simply the human impact. The Atlantic is the world's busiest ocean. It's the busiest digital seaway. The digital connections across the Atlantic are the busiest in the world. Goods trade are the same as across the Pacific. And services, investment flows, digital commerce are far greater, actually, than anything going on in the Pacific. And in terms of resources, the Atlantic is the home to the world's richest fishing resources. It's home to three of the world's four major carbon reservoirs. It is the locus of the world's thermohaline circulation pattern of currents that reduces extremes in the planet's climate. It's home to many, as we said, of the world's critical raw materials and minerals. And it's a central energy reservoir for the world. It's really redrawing global maps for all sorts of energy, oil, gas, renewables, clean tech, and innovation, again, in ways that seems to escape attention. If you think of the Atlantic Basin as the unit of analysis, you see, and you compare it to an energy between another area we call the Great Crescent, that is the Middle East up through Russia, or you take the Asia Pacific, so those three regions, you see the Atlantic actually produces almost half of the world's energy. It's also the most interdependent of those three regions. The trade and energy interconnections are within the Atlantic, most Atlantic countries. It produces 70% of the growth in oil production, according to the International Energy Agency, going out to 2035. It will outpace the Great Crescent and the Asia Pacific by far the Asia Pacific, what doesn't produce a lot of energy in terms of gas and in terms of biofuels. So it is energy rich, but it faces some issues. There's a conflict between short-term energy development and long-term climate interests. There's a big gap in terms of energy access. The Atlantic is energy rich and energy poor at the same time. Millions of people, particularly in Africa and South America, lack access to, regular access to energy resources. There's also a big gap in the digital access. I've mentioned it being the densest digital, but it is very uneven. It's mainly North Atlantic. And there's a big gap, millions again of people, especially in Africa and South America, who do not have access to regular digital access. That becomes important because one of the issues we're facing now is, again, what we would call the digital energy nexus. That is, the digital build out is going to the South Atlantic now globally. All sorts of data centers, all sorts of subsea cable connections are heading south. And yet the energy use they require is astounding sometimes. And it aggravates rather than helps the digital energy access issues that I just mentioned. And then we have the gap, of course, between the need of richer developed countries for access to critical raw materials if they want to conduct their green transition or work on clean tech issues. And of course, in the southern areas of South America and Africa, which have many of these minerals, trying to strike a fair deal of how you can help them develop it while you do that. So we have a whole set of issues here that are particularly Atlantic, distinctively Atlantic. And if you add then a couple other strategic issues here, you see the what's called de-risking strategies, offshoring, outsourcing, nearshoring strategies because of trade issues are also boosting the Atlantic. A lot of that trade is shifting to Atlantic areas. The Atlantic leads the world in blue growth strategies, that is, the development of the oceans for economic purposes. But again, that creates lots of other issues. And then there is the looming issue of the role of non-Atlantic powers in all of this. Sabrine mentioned at the beginning development of cobalt and so on, but that's just the beginning. There's lots of issues about ports, trade, and access. So let me just leave it there as sort of a, tee up my colleagues who are really specialists in specifics of these areas, and I'd love to hear more from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was great. So I know Elizabeth does know a lot about these geology and other issues. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Bill. And just my thanks too to the Atlantic Council, the Africa Center, our host Sabrine, and others for drawing us together on this important topic. Thanks, Dan, for teeing up your remarks. I think I'll reinforce and complement some of the things that you were discussing. So I'm going to cover 3 areas related specifically to ocean energy and mineral resources, and I hope these will lead into a good conversation in the last half of our time here. First, I'm going to pick up on the point of the overarching importance of ocean resources, and particularly in the Atlantic, for reasons Dan outlined, not only for maritime nations, but for the world, with the associated collective responsibility for resource stewardship. The second point I'll talk about is the growing need and competition, Dan already highlighted, globally for energy and mineral resources is going to continue. And it's natural that people want to understand the oceans as a potential source for new energy and mineral resources to meet those needs. But there are a lot of dependencies in getting access to those resources and understanding the impacts, whether positive or negative. And the third point will be, speaking especially from my role within the national academies, I'd really like to highlight the importance of independent scientific research and using a science evidence base as a really necessary input to policy and decision making around any development of ocean-based energy and mineral resources. So to the first point, kind of what's at stake. The ocean, I'll reiterate some of what Dan said, the ocean is critical for all life on Earth, and it impacts all of us, whether we're in maritime zones or living deep in continents, influences climate and weather, provides food, maintains global diversity, helps regulate the balance of chemicals in the Earth's atmosphere, provides modes of transport for people and goods, and it's a resource for anything from critical medicines through to energy and mineral resources. And an example from a recent study the National Academies did last year on the next decade of research for ocean sciences, talking about the blue economy, which you brought up, Dan. This global blue economy is projected to reach at least $3 trillion by the year 2030, and that's just continuing to grow, with the Atlantic having a really key role in that place. And with half the world's population living near the coasts, we can't ignore what's happening on and particularly within the oceans and on and beneath the seafloor. So that's a collective responsibility to manage the impacts of ocean resource development. For my second point, energy is critical to a nation's growth, and minerals are an underpinning to many modern technologies and really to the way society is functioning today. Energy and mineral development are needed to support the advancement of people and communities worldwide, and they're critical to industry and commerce, jobs, the overall economy. There are a number of dependencies, though, and the first is really that energy, and whether this is offshore wind or oil and gas, or other offshore ocean-based energies, which I won't go into very much, or offshore minerals, they're constrained geologically and or geographically. So there's not equal access to everyone everywhere. And that just general availability based on the geology and geography is coupled with the fact that the presence of offshore energy or mineral resources doesn't mean that it's in significant enough quantities or in a suitable place, depending on water depth or distance from shore or whatever the reason may be. It doesn't mean it's in a suitable place for commercial production. And even if the resource is deemed to be sufficient from a commercial standpoint, it doesn't mean that the production is without environmental or other risks. And some of the resource development happens in a country's exclusive economic zone, but others take place in international waters. So there's that factor to bring into the picture too. And that's particularly true for the prospect of seabed mining, where there's intense international interest to explore and develop resources from the deep ocean. But regardless where the resources are developed, the ocean circulates, and so the impacts can have far-reaching consequences outside that specific area where the work may be taking place to develop the resource. And so there's a collective we that needs to maintain accountability and stewardship of the ocean environment. And I think that we didn't define sustainability, and maybe that's part of the conversation that we'll have. But I think if the resources we're talking about, the mineral and some of the energy resources, especially oil and gas, they're finite. They're not sustainable. At some point, they will not exist anymore if we mine them. But the sustainability of the ocean environment may be where we need to head when we're talking about development of the resources. And finally, to the last point about the importance of science as a key part for next steps for resource development offshore. We have to know what's known, and we have to know what we don't know. In a certain sense, humans find it easier to make decisions about things they can't see than about things they can. And so it's out there in the ocean, we can't see it, so maybe it's not so bad. How do these offshore developments affect living things in the sea in diverse habitats, from microorganisms to plants to fish to reptiles and mammals? Maybe Kelly will get into some of that with her remarks. How's the water column affected, both chemically and physically, when we are putting infrastructure and taking things out of the ground or developing hydrodynamic situations from wind turbines? How do these affect transitions from stages of exploration to development to long-term production and eventually decommissioning of the infrastructure? There's a whole life cycle there as well. We have a long time to gather data from oil and gas offshore. We've basically been producing in some way or another for at least 100 years. We have more information from the early 1990s, starting around then in the North Atlantic, related to wind development offshore. There's some lessons learned there that I think can be applicable to things like development of deep sea minerals, where we have a lot more limited commercial scale industrial development. But each of those kinds of industries is also quite different. They have different footprints, different technologies, different water depths. So we really do need that research, and we need that research to be available to the international community. And with that, I'm going to stop, Bill.
No, I think that's key. And actually, the point about sustainability, that it must include the environment, I think is really clear. And some of you may remember the Brundtland report on sustainable development. And I remember when the Council on Environmental Equality that Gus Beth was talking about changing the name to the Council on Sustainable Development, which actually I didn't like at the time. But the point is that when when I think of sustainability in this context, it's particularly the environmental impact. So with that, let me turn to Kelly, who's maybe she'll address that issue, but broadly the environmental side of things.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks to the Policy Center for the New South, and thank you to the Atlantic Council's Africa Center for including me in this discussion. I will focus, I think, to Dan's point about some of the human impacts here through the lens of marine living resources on which we all depend. And so in preparation for this, I wanted to focus a little bit on the West African fisheries and the implications that some of the decisions being made with respect to uses in the Atlantic Ocean not only impact the African continent, but we're all connected across the Atlantic, as Dan pointed out. And so at the top level, small-scale fisheries in Africa, in Western Africa specifically, I'm focusing on the Atlantic side, represent $3.5 billion US per year. That does not include the industrial scale fisheries of other countries that are participating in fisheries there. 6.7 million people directly depend on fishing activities for their food and livelihood. And estimates vary, but according to the FAO, fish comprises upwards of 80% of animal protein consumed. So I think fish is a really interesting currency to look at food security, economic security, and in some cases, national security as well. And even more importantly, as we think about the interconnectedness of the Atlantic, I cannot understate the importance of the Gulf of Guinea as a spawning ground for Atlantic tropical tunas. And the tropical tunas are big eye, yellowfin, and skipjack. So many of the tunas you all eat in cans or as sushi from the Atlantic have been spawned in the Gulf of Guinea. In the United States, we catch those mature adults. So what's coming, the juvenile spawned in the Gulf of Guinea make their way to our fishery in the United States, where we're catching the mature adults. And just for comparison, and this is not tuna specific, but in the United States, $2 billion of fish are landed annually just on the Atlantic coast alone. So in looking at Dan's paper, as he's projecting out in 2031, the critical mineral industry could reach 31.5 billion. So if we start adding up kind of the cumulative equalities between our extractive natural resources, including fish, I think that there's a conversation here to be had about multiple uses and how we balance developing interest in offshore extractive energy sources against those existing industries that are creating food and economic security for countries around the Atlantic. A couple of the threats to the fisheries have already been noted. Changing ocean conditions can't be understated. Where the fish are and how they're surviving is changing very rapidly. Overexploitation, so overfishing, the threat of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is a threat, again, that brings in the national security equation. Degrading environmental conditions threatens the viability of those fisheries over the long run. And depending on where you're operating in the Atlantic, there are foreign influences, the ability for countries to pay to operate in a country's exclusive economic zone and benefit from those natural resources. So I'm going to keep this brief because I'd really much rather answer all of your questions about this. But I just wanted to set up the dynamic between our marine living resources and the potential energy, energy riches that could come from the Atlantic, as well as other multiple uses in this space. And with one last teaser, I'd love to talk about the accountability mechanisms. We struggle with fisheries enforcement and prosecution in the high seas with compliance. And so when new users enter that space, how are we ensuring accountability and compliance with those industries against those existing ones? Thank you.
Now, thank you very much, Kelly. And and let me note that the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is an important statute, which unfortunately the administration has said it will no longer enforce. So I think there's some issues here that are pretty topical. One thing you make me think of, Kelly, is aquaculture in Africa. And I mean, fish are a source of energy, so maybe we can call it part of energy and minerals from the sea. People need that energy, and Africa has projects, and it's conducting aquaculture, but it's really lagged behind Asia for a long time now. And even though tilapia could be potentially such a great source of food, and maybe an alternative to wild catch to some extent. So I don't know, something to think about. With that said, we're going to move on to our last but not least panelist, Bakre Sambe, who bat and clean up here, who give us probably a view into reality a little bit in terms of civil society. So Bakre, take the floor, please.
Okay, thank you very much for your invitation. I would like to thank the Atlantic Council and the Policy Center for the New South. Greetings to Sabrina and our friend Karim El Ainawi, who has invited me several ways to come to Morocco and to discuss this very important issue for our region and our continent. Without being a specialist of energy, I would like to rise to 3 points I would like to highlight. The first one is the insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea and its impact on energy issues in Africa and internationally, like in this region where USAID was intervening in littoral regional initiative is now stopped because of what you know. The second point is about Niger, the impact of Niger crisis and related geopolitical dynamics as an example of impact of instability on energy policies and access in the Atlantic corridor. The final point I would like to make is the question: what impact of the combination of all these factors on the implementation of Atlantic Initiative launched by Morocco? First of all, for the first point about the insecurity, you know that this insecurity is characterized by piracy, maritime banditry, terrorism, jihadism, and additionally insecurity linked to jihadism spreading from the Sahel to coastal countries like Togo and Benin, exacerbate tension and limits investment in energy infrastructure, including rural electrification project and regional interconnection, such as the high voltage line between Niger, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Togo, and Benin. So in terms of Africa's energy landscape, this insecurity hampers the continent's immense potential, where 2 out of 3 African lack access to modern and reliable energy sources, and it is a real problem we face here. And the other point, on an international level now, there is some disruptions, and these disruptions have significant consequences in the region because Western countries, particularly the United States, which aims to increase its African oil imports, and Europe reliant on the Gulf of Guinea maritime routes, and so are directly impacted by this insecurity, which diverts financial and human resources. And we have some consequences on this in this way. So we have also the second point regarding Niger. now how Niger crisis as an example of impact of instability on energy policies and access in the access in the Atlantic corridor. First of all, Niger is known for its large uranium reserves, making it one of the world's leading suppliers of this essential mineral for nuclear power generation. And for decades, we have the exploitation of these resources by Orano, which is the French company. And now, since the President Mohamed Bazoum was pushed out of power, this mark it a turning point in the region. And this political change raises several energy issues. Firstly, there is a clear desire for energy sovereignty. The new government wants to maximize the benefits of uranium. In the meantime, secondly, we have the potential break with France and West opened the door to new players such as Russia and China, who could offer investment, etc. And finally, we see that Niger faces a crucial internal challenges, how to reconcile its energy ambition with the urgent need of its population. And for this point also, we have a lot of consequences. First, we can mention the disruption of the uranium supply chain, as you may know. And you have another point, the uranium price volatility in the region, the geopolitical reorientation of export. If Niger diversifies its partners by favoring countries such as Russia or China, this could alter traditional uranium flows. For example, Russia, already influential in the nuclear sector via Rosatom, could strengthen its position by securing a share of Niger production for its own needs. And we have also the impact of the global on the global energy transition, as you may know, and the secondary effect also on renewable energy, and some risk regarding of precedent in the region. And now we see that Niger is not the only energy-rich African country to experience political upheaval. If other Sahelian or African nations follow a similar trajectory, for example, Mali or Central African Republic, this could amplify uncertainties over the global supply of energy, raw material, including uranium, lithium, and cobalt. And my last point to finish is what will be the impact of the on the implementation of the Atlantic Initiative launched by Morocco. We know that this political situation will have some consequences. First, reinforce Nigerian support of the initiative. Niger, under the current regime, expressed very big interest in the Atlantic Initiative as early as December 2023, seeing this opening to the Atlantic as very crucial for its economics because of the sanction from ECOWAS. And the second point is also there is the political and security instability challenge. However, we see that this persistent instability in Niger is will have some impact in the Liptako-Gourma region with also such as an extension of road and rail network to the Sahel. Potential financial partners like USA and Europe may reluctant to commit to a region where security is not guaranteed, thus slowing down progress. And also other consequences we have to put in mind some points. It will be the increased geopolitical competition with Algeria. The situation in Niger is exacerbating tension between Morocco and Algeria, which sees the Atlantic Initiative as a Moroccan attempt to isolate Algiers in the Sahel. Algeria, historically close to the Sahelian military juntas, could now intensify its effort to counter Moroccan influence. And in the meantime, some countries see that this initiative is really an economic opportunity and energy dependency. The Atlantic Initiative could benefit from Niger's need to diversify its economic and also to be connected with the very important Dakhla Atlantic port. And because and in the meantime, this very interesting project which a lot of interest from African countries and mostly the Sahelian countries now may have some risk of regional polarization. You know that Niger exit from ECOWAS and its potential rapprochement with Morocco could accentuate regional fragmentation in West Africa and the Sahel. If the Atlantic Initiative succeeds in integrating Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, it could create a new economic and political bloc aligned with Rabat to the detriment of the traditional regional structure. This would reinforce Morocco's ambition to become an essential hub between sub-Saharan Africa and Europe, but also run the risk of fueling tension with the countries that remain with ECOWAS. In conclusion, we can say that the situation in Niger offers strategic opportunities for the Atlantic Initiative, notably by consolidating Morocco's role as a privileged partner for Sahelian countries seeking alternative. However, also poses major challenges linked to instability and security and geopolitical competition, which could slow down or limit its development. Now, the evolution of the initiative will largely depend on Morocco's ability to mobilize international funding and maintain stable relation with the Niger regime while navigating a complex regional context. To date, these dynamics remain in flux, making the future of this initiative both promising and uncertain. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's very helpful. So we have 17 minutes left by my count. And what I suggest is maybe I'll ask Bakary a question, which I have in mind now. And then each of you, please think about what you might want to say or questions to ask of others. And if you have something, raise your hand. And actually, so Bakary, here's my question is, if you were to pick maybe just one thing that you think the nations of West Africa or maybe the international community could do to sort of help stabilize the kinds of things you were talking about. Do you have something like that in mind that you've been thinking about that you think is out there and we could do or you could do?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think that the first thing is to go beyond security approach and to try to work on resilience, to strengthen the local communities also. And in the meantime, I know that the security approach will not solve the problem of insecurity in the region. And in the meantime, also, I think that this international competition between Russia, China, and the Western is disrupting the dynamics on Earth. Africa, our region, and even the Gulf of Guinea is becoming a new battleground for the powers. In the meantime, we are neglecting the real dynamics to take into account and our capacity of resilience to reinforce instead of imposing security measure or security approach, which have never solved any security problem. And mostly jihadism, if you learn from the experience of Afghanistan and other regions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you very much. So if the panelists want to say something, raise your hand. And Alexander, if there are written questions submitted, you could also bring them up until someone here raises his or her hand. Dan.
Just to keep the conversation going. So I think Bakary, illustrates really important interconnections between the security issues, resource issues, energy. They're all interrelated. I would add one other one. He's right on all the ones I just heard, but I would add one other that is purely Atlantic, and that is the interconnection between guns, drugs, and terror that has become a pan-Atlantic phenomenon. You have guns coming down from North America, drugs coming up from South America, going across the Atlantic to these very same areas you're talking about, that have become areas of ungoverned space in West Africa, in which jihadi terrorism is also playing a role. And then flow back up into Europe, because that's where the markets are. So you have created now a pan-Atlantic dynamic here that has given Africa a drug problem it didn't have before. It has created and fueled the insecurities that Bakary has mentioned It has inhibited lots of the opportunities of common learnings and common workings. And it has created, generated huge violence across the entire space. And there's no pan-Atlantic governance mechanism to address that issue. It doesn't exist because, again, we think North Atlantic or South Atlantic, and we have not figured out the pan-Atlantic. So that's just one. Second point, just on the energy dynamics, is in my experience, there's a lot of very constructive learnings that can take place from Africa to Central and South America. The North doesn't even have to really be involved. And I think one of the underdeveloped links in the pan-Atlantic is this links across the Southern Atlantic space. I've been part of just listening because I didn't have anything to contribute, between Africans wanting to learn about Central American regional energy markets, because the Central Americans have developed a regional energy market that has lots of lessons having to do with access and problems of infrastructure and so on, that is very applicable, I thought our African friends said, to their issues. So stimulating more of that, I think, is very helpful in terms of relevant challenges of countries who are at different development stages, rather than only listening to Americans or Europeans telling everyone, how this should work. And then finally, I would just say we have another issue here, which is the potential withdrawal of the United States from any of this. So the Lobedo Corridor, for instance, a major project helping access for raw materials, funded and it was by the US and the European Union in particular, is probably now at question. And I wonder, maybe it's not, but I think there's just huge uncertainty now about what we're going to be doing. And as Bakri said, some of the issues mean non-Atlantic actors are engaged much more than before. And so I have some concerns about the strategic nature that will affect the energy dynamics that we have. And my last point would just be back to just say the piece I said earlier. There's the digital energy nexus that we all have to face, which is digital access could help energy access in the South, but it will require huge energy, cost. And vice versa. Energy access would allow, countries in Africa and South America to really, get into the world, and yet they don't have that digital connection yet. So there's a dynamic there that we are all facing. It's a common problem. So it seems to me that what might be a useful issue to hone in on as we go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Actually, I would add, in terms of concerns about USAID and other funding by the United States, I don't know who here has read the continuing resolution that was passed, and I know a lot of people were following the fight over it. But that resolution gives the president broad power to withhold money so long as he reports to Congress. So there's not ground in the short term for being that optimistic about, I think, the flow of a lot of this funding. So I have a question, but I want to see, does anybody want to comment on what Dan just said or anything else? Well, here's my general question. Part of what's going on in this project is a look at artificial intelligence, which I've been looking at some. When I was in the government before I came here, I saw that it was going to cause big changes, and it was really interesting to push it within an agency. People are having a hard time, I think, realizing how big a change is coming. But it seems likely to me in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll have something that people call superintelligence or AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is as smart as people are, smarter probably a little bit. It's hard to tell whether these mechanisms could actually feel anything. But it is going to affect the way we deal with energy and minerals and everything else, but energy and minerals in particular. And it's really a blessing and a curse, I think, in a lot of ways, because the opportunity for speeding up procedural requirements and for quick analysis. And actually, despite the fact these models are biased in some ways, they're actually an opportunity for less biased results than one gets from people. On the other hand, there's so many people, and who, especially in less wealthy countries, who are employed in actually doing the kind of work that AI will do. So I have a project with the Morocco Center and the Africa Center. Hopefully, gladly, it's not due till next fall, but it's on the role of AI in development assistance. But I'm really curious what you think, because I'm sure everyone on this panel has probably used ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and is beginning to get a feel. So let me throw that out there. Oh, and I see Elizabeth has raised her hand.
Yeah, thanks, Bill, for that. And I'm certainly not an AI machine learning expert. That's not my field, but in terms of its applications to some of the things we've been discussing, I guess I always go back to the AI, the success of the application of AI to any sort of question is really dependent on the data and the quality of the data. And it has to go back to that. We have a lot of things on that these models are trained on. We have a lot of things on the internet or what have you, but not all of them are curated. The fundamental data we may need to make some of these major resource decisions for energy, for minerals, for fisheries, whatever the case may be. I really want to just hit hard again on the value of the scientific data and the preservation of that data, the continuing collection of those data and the monitoring. Because if we lose data streams, if we don't have the ability to curate those data streams, I don't know that the AI and the models are going to get better. I worry that they may get worse because we may be not taking advantage of the data sets that we already have, but more to the point of a collection of the data, and maybe can add in another point to something that Dan and Bakari raised too, that this idea that one or another country may not be part of the conversation going forward, that to me means that coalitions of researchers, that communities of researchers need to work together, because we can't for any given period of time, if one nation or another nation falls out of the conversation, we have to be able to keep going with the science that's going to help feed into these models and help decision makers make critical decisions that have a lot of trade-offs. There's no easy answer with any of this. I'll stop there.
No, that's great. And to note, I agree with everything you said, Elizabeth. In fact, there's one thing people may want to read that's interesting. It's by Dario Amodei, who's I don't know him, I have no connection to him, but he's the CEO and founder of Anthropic. That's the company that made Claude. And they've been more careful about the information that they put into their model for some of the reasons that Elizabeth was talking about. And if what AI can do is the marginal return on intelligence, which is what he describes, you still need human beings to be involved, not only in intelligence, but actually going out there and doing what it takes to get the information, the research that Elizabeth was talking about. So Kelly, go for it.
Thank you. I'll build a little bit on what Elizabeth said, and again, through a fisheries lens, which, and also what Dan was saying, who has access to that information once it becomes available? So in the digitization, if you don't have access to the information that could make your life easier, more efficient, like potentially artisanal and subsistence fishers, are you creating an even wider gap between who has the information and who's able to use it and who doesn't, and creating an inadvertent advantage in decision making? So I'll just add that in the kind of balance of who has access to information, who's able to use it, who's able to apply it, and who's able to benefit from it.
No, that's really right. And actually, I mentioned Anthropic. I didn't say the article. It's the title is Machines of Loving Grace. If you Google that, there's a 14,000 word essay that he wrote that's fascinating on this point. Okay, well, I have another couple of questions, but raise your hand, anyone here, if you want to say something. I've said enough. Well, I'm curious about any thoughts people have about deep seabed mining for critical minerals, which are defined by nations. That's not a chemical term, although they are chemicals. The United States has defined 50 of them. It's based on their usefulness and how vulnerable supply chains are. They usually include the 17 rare earth elements that are actual elements. And so there's this big discussion that Elizabeth referenced. It's going on right now. I think tomorrow is the last day of the most recent International Seabed Authority meeting in Jamaica. I gather they're not going to actually approve the final regulations on exploitation later on this year, maybe, or something like that. But there is a real issue about land versus sea for that. And people have all kinds of different views. I mean, I have a view which is a little bit cautious in respect of the sea. I've been looking at the biology, and it's just there's so many things down there that we've never described, even the bigger things. And what I see is the potential for strip mining, huge areas of the ocean. And I guess, like Elizabeth was saying, I'm afraid that we may do something in the short term that we will never be able to change because the nodules they want to take are growing like a million years it takes. So that's my view. Actually, as I expressed it, but I hope someone here will take issue with me and say we should just suck those nodules right out. Any thoughts? Callie.
Thanks, Bill. I'll echo the note that Elizabeth made regarding the need for scientific evidence to inform decision making on this topic. And maybe to Dan's dismay, I'm going to look at the Pacific here. There are 4 Pacific Island nations who have expressed an interest in developing their critical mineral, offshore critical mineral resources. That's Kiribati, Nauru, the Cook Islands, and Tonga. Of those 4, 3 of them are defined as tuna-dependent economies. So what's the trade-off? And I think that there's a case study in development as we look potentially in the Pacific, which might be a little bit further ahead on some of these, as the International Seabed Authority, moves the multilateral process forward required to develop those initial regulations for extraction in the high seas.
Oh, that's great. Well, I watched says 10:30. So Alexander, I assume we're supposed to stop. Oh, well. So this has been really lovely. I've really enjoyed, I've known Elizabeth for a long time, but I've really enjoyed meeting the rest of you. I hope we can all stay in touch. Bakri has a final comment.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that regarding all these connected issues, we have to pay attention on how we can connect South-South initiative like the Atlantic initiative launched by Morocco and the global initiatives. Otherwise, we will not be able to fully understand the local dynamics. And I think that the initiative launched by Morocco is something very useful and very constructive for African countries in the Atlantic corridor. And now the issue is how to connect this with the global initiatives in order to harmonize strategies, because we are talking about very critical issues like the mineral and also the transportation and energy. The other thing also is to see now what will be the consequences of stopping the project of USAID. For example, we have a very concrete example here in Lome in Togo. Between Togo, Benin, Ghana, and it was a common project called Littoral Regional Initiative. It was about how to build resilience in northern part of Benin and Togo, and to fight violent extremism, terrorism, everything, and to promote social cohesion, I think, and stability, which are very critical for to exploit the oil or to exploit the energy mineral. You need peace and stability. And now all this project was stopped. And my feeling is that the government will continue now to just focus on security approaches, which are not very efficient. And I think that yes, it's a kind of linkage between global trends, global issues, and local issues and regional issues, and how to harmonize between different initiatives for the same goal. Thank you.
No, thank you, Bakri. So yeah, we do have to wrap it up. I think maybe we're in someone else's bandwidth or something now. So let me thank all of the panelists for your great presentations, questions, and the Policy Center for the New South in Morocco, and the Africa Center of the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for being here, and see you again. Bye.